The night was cold and quiet. A soft wind moved through the empty streets of the ruined colony. The buildings stood like skeletons, half buried under dust and silence. A single man walked through the shadows carrying a small metal box. His name was Rylan, a human soldier who stayed behind when everyone else left. He didn't have much, but every evening he came to this same broken alley with leftover food. He called it the feeding station. On the old wall behind him, faded red letters still spelled those words. It was once a real food center for travelers and workers. Now only stray animals came here. Dogs, rats, and little desert creatures waited every night for his footsteps. Rylan always smiled when he saw them run to the bowl. In this dead world, it felt good to care for something still alive. But tonight, something felt strange. The air was heavy, the street too silent. He waited for the usual growls and soft feet, but nothing came. Rylan frowned and placed the food down near the rusted bowl. He looked around, hearing only the sound of the wind. Then, from behind an old pipe, came a soft sound, like a tiny sob. He turned his light toward it. Something moved, small, fast, afraid. He took a slow step forward. 3 little shapes crouched together, trying to hide. At first, he thought they were lost children, but when the light touched their faces, his breath stopped. Their skin was pale blue, glowing faintly under the light. Their eyes were large and bright, like silver moons. They were not human. They were alien girls. The oldest one looked about 12, holding 2 younger ones close. Their clothes were torn, their faces covered with dust and scratches. They were trembling, hungry, and frightened. Rylan slowly knelt down, showing his empty hands. "It's okay," he whispered softly. "I won't hurt you." They didn't understand his words, but his calm voice made them pause. He pushed the bowl closer. The smell of food filled the air. For a long moment, they just stared at it, unsure if it was safe. Then the smallest one crawled forward. Her thin fingers reached out, shaking. She took a piece of bread and began to eat fast. The others joined her, sharing every crumb. They were starving. Rylan felt a tightness in his chest. He couldn't imagine how long they had been here alone. He noticed strange marks on their arms, burned symbols that looked like brands. Something terrible had happened to them. Maybe they had escaped from somewhere. Maybe they were left behind. He didn't know, but he knew one thing. They needed help. Suddenly, a growl echoed from the dark corner of the alley. Rylan turned fast, his hand on his weapon. 2 glowing eyes appeared in the shadows, then more behind them. The hungry animals had come, drawn by the smell of food. The alien girls froze, terrified. Rylan stood up, stepping in front of them. "Stay back," he said firmly, his voice deep and steady. The beasts moved closer, growling louder. Rylan pulled his blaster but fired into the air. The loud sound echoed through the alley. The animals yelped and ran away, disappearing into the night. Silence returned, broken only by the girls' quiet breathing. When Rylan turned, the oldest girl was staring at him, her silver eyes wide with surprise. The smallest one took a step forward and gently touched his arm. Her hand was cold, her voice soft. She whispered something in her own language, a single word filled with meaning. Rylan didn't understand it, but he knew what she was trying to say. "Thank you." He smiled for the first time in weeks. He had come to feed stray animals, but he had found something far more human than he expected. 3 lost alien girls who looked at him not with fear, but with hope. As they ate quietly under the pale light, Rylan sat nearby, keeping watch. He didn't know who they were or where they came from, but deep inside, he felt something awaken, the reason he had survived this long. Compassion. And before the night ended, Rylan made a silent promise. He would protect them, no matter what came next. He didn't know it yet, but this small act of kindness would soon change his destiny, and maybe the entire galaxy. The night passed slowly. Rylan stayed awake near the small fire he had built from broken wood. The 3 alien girls slept close together under a torn blanket he had found in his pack. He didn't know their names, but somehow, their quiet breathing made him feel less alone. The smallest one kept murmuring in her sleep, whispering words that sounded like songs from another world. Rylan looked at her and wondered how something so innocent could exist in a galaxy that had forgotten kindness. When the first light of dawn touched the ruins, he stood and looked around. The world outside was gray and cold, a place that had seen too many wars. But today, He felt a strange purpose growing in his heart. He didn't know where to take them, or if there was anyone left who could help. Yet he had made a promise, even if no one heard it. He would keep them safe. The girls woke up quietly, their eyes blinking at the sun. The oldest one held the other two close, always protective, always watchful. Rylan smiled and opened a small ration pack, handing them water and dry bread. They looked at him with confusion, but when he smiled, they copied him, smiling back shyly. It was a small thing, but it warmed his heart more than he could explain. He pointed to himself. Rylan, he said slowly, tapping his chest. Then he pointed at them, trying to ask their names. The middle one tilted her head and whispered, Lyra, then pointed to the smallest one, Novi, and to the eldest, Saren. Their voices were soft, almost musical. Rylan repeated their names, his accent rough but kind. The girls giggled quietly, the sound echoing softly through the ruined street. For a brief moment, the place didn't feel so empty anymore. They ate together in silence, the wind carrying the smell of dust and metal. But something in the air made Rylan uneasy. A faint humming sound, distant but familiar. He knew that sound. It wasn't the wind. It was the engine of a patrol drone. If the drones found these alien children, they'd be taken away, maybe worse. He quickly motioned for them to stay quiet. The girls obeyed instantly, hiding behind the broken wall. Their instincts told them what his words couldn't. They had run from such sounds before. Rylan watched the silver machine fly over the horizon, scanning the ruins. Its lights flickered like cold stars as it passed by. He held his breath until it disappeared into the mist. Then he lowered his weapon and looked back at the girls. They were trembling again, their trust tested by fear. He crouched beside them and whispered softly, You're safe now. Saren, the eldest, slowly nodded, her eyes glistening in the light. They began moving before sunrise. Rylan led them through narrow paths and broken alleys, avoiding open roads. He knew the area well. The old supply tunnels beneath the colony were still half open. He had used them during the evacuation years ago. They were dark and cold, but safer than the streets. As they entered the tunnels, Novi held his hand tightly, her fingers tiny and warm. He didn't pull away. Somehow, her grip gave him courage. Inside the tunnel, water dripped from the ceiling, and the air smelled like metal and oil. Rylan turned on a small lamp, lighting the path ahead. Strange symbols were scratched on the walls, alien marks he couldn't read. Saren looked at them with a sad expression. He could see memories in her eyes. Maybe they once belonged to her people, maybe not. But he didn't ask, he only walked forward. Sometimes silence was the kindest language. Hours passed before they reached a small underground shelter. It had once been a worker's rest zone. Now it was his home. Old crates, a half-working stove, a blanket, and a few lights. He motioned for them to sit, gave them warm food, and for the first time, they smiled without fear. They ate slowly, their movements graceful, almost sacred, as if each bite meant hope. Rylan leaned back, watching them quietly. He remembered his own daughter then, lost years ago when the war began. Maybe that was why these girls touched his heart so deeply. He saw her in their faces, in their innocence, in their need to be protected. And as the night deepened, he knew this wasn't just an accident. Fate had brought them together for a reason. Outside, the wind howled again, carrying the echo of engines far away. Someone was searching, maybe for the girls, maybe for him. But Rylan didn't care anymore. He had made his choice. He would protect these alien children, even if the whole galaxy stood against him. Morning came slow and silent. The weak sunlight crawled across the cracks of the shelter walls, painting gold lines over cold metal. Rylan opened his eyes, his blaster still resting by his side. He wasn't used to sleeping peacefully, but the soft sound of the girls breathing nearby made the place feel almost alive. For the first time in months, he didn't wake up to loneliness. Novi was already awake, sitting near the lamp, staring curiously at the glowing light. Her small blue fingers touched the air around it, like she was learning what warmth meant. Rylan smiled faintly and poured a bit of water into a tin cup. "Good morning," he whispered, though he knew she couldn't understand the words. Still, she smiled back, a shy, innocent smile that reminded him why he stayed. Saren, the eldest, helped the others wash their faces using the small basin. Rylan noticed how careful she was, like an older sister who had been forced to grow up too soon. She didn't speak much, but her eyes carried wisdom far beyond her age. When their breakfast was done, Ryland turned on his scanner. A red light blinked on the display, movement detected. He frowned and adjusted the frequency. The signal was faint but steady, coming from the west. Not human, not animal, something else. He moved outside quietly, scanning the horizon. The sky above the ruins was filled with thin clouds. In the distance, a shape glimmered for a second, metal wings reflecting sunlight. Ryland's heart sank. It was a search drone, one of the newer ones, equipped for thermal scanning. If it found the shelter, they were done. He rushed back inside, his face serious. Saren looked up immediately, sensing danger before he spoke. Ryland knelt beside her and pointed up, mimicking the drone's sound with a low hum. Her eyes widened. She nodded and quickly gathered the younger ones. He handed her his old cloak, gesturing for them to stay behind the crates. Then he turned off the lamp and waited in silence. The humming grew louder, vibrating through the floor. Dust fell from the ceiling. Ryland aimed his blaster at the door, holding his breath. A beam of blue light swept through a broken gap in the roof, scanning the floor. He could feel his pulse in his throat. Then, just as suddenly, the sound faded. The drone passed, disappearing behind the ridge. Ryland exhaled slowly, his hands shaking a little. The girls peeked from their hiding spot, eyes wide. Novi crawled toward him, touching his hand with worry. He forced a small smile. "It's gone," he whispered. She didn't understand, but her relief was clear. Saren came forward and bowed her head slightly, a gesture of gratitude from her people. Ryland returned it awkwardly, feeling a strange respect growing between them. Later that day, as the sky darkened again, Ryland worked to seal the tunnel entrance with metal scraps. The girls helped him, lifting small pieces, handing tools, trying their best to copy his actions. He found it both heartbreaking and beautiful. They had lost everything, yet still tried to build something new. When the work was done, he gave them a few small glow sticks from his gear. Novi laughed when it lit up, spinning it around like a tiny star. Lyra clapped her hands, her soft laughter echoing against the cold walls. For a moment, the shelter didn't feel like a hideout. It felt like home. That night, Ryland told them stories using gestures and drawings on the dusty floor. He drew a crude map of stars, showing Earth, pointing to himself and saying home. Saren understood, and after a pause, she drew another circle, then pointed upward. Her eyes softened. That was their home, a planet he didn't know. She pressed her hand to her heart, then to the drawing, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. Ryland didn't need translation to feel her pain. He reached into his pocket and handed her a small metal badge, his old unit emblem, a symbol of humanity's unity before the war. She took it carefully, holding it close like it was something sacred. That small gesture created a silent bond between them. A soldier who lost his family and 3 alien children who lost their world. All now bound by the simplest thing in the universe, kindness. Outside, lightning flashed far away. Thunder rolled across the horizon. Ryland looked up through the hole in the roof and saw faint lights moving behind the storm clouds. Not lightning, ships. He clenched his jaw, realizing what that meant. If ships were here, then someone knew these alien children had escaped. The storm wasn't just in the sky anymore. It was coming for them. He turned toward Saren and the others. They watched him with quiet trust, unaware of what was about to come. Ryland took a deep breath, checking his blaster, tightening his belt. Whatever waited out there, he would face it, because in this ruined world, he had finally found something worth fighting for. The wind howled through the cracked tunnels like a warning from the gods. Ryland stood near the old monitor screen, watching a weak signal blink on and off. Static covered most of it, but one thing was clear: someone had detected movement near the old colony ruins. He cursed under his breath, tightening the straps on his vest. The storm outside was growing stronger, lightning flashing across the sky in pale blue streaks. Rain began to fall through the open cracks, tapping the metal roof like distant drums. Saren stood beside him, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the dark. She didn't understand human words, but she understood danger. Lyra and Novi huddled together near the fire, frightened by the sound of thunder. Ryland turned toward them and smiled softly, trying to ease their fear. "It's just noise," he said gently, though deep down, he knew the real noise was coming. Engines, not thunder. He moved quickly, checking his gear. He had 2 blaster cells left, 1 knife, and a single flare grenade. Not much against whatever was searching for them. He pulled out an old radio from a crate, connecting wires to a small power cell. The static cleared, and a voice broke through, robotic and cold. Sector 12 detected heat signatures, initiating recovery protocol. Ryland's blood ran cold. Recovery protocol meant capture, and for aliens, that usually meant dissection. He turned off the radio immediately. Saren stepped closer, sensing the shift in his expression. He pointed upward, mimicking the shape of a ship, then drew a line across his throat. Her face turned pale. She understood. Without another word, she gathered the others, helping them pack what little they had. Novi clutched the small glow stick Ryland gave her, refusing to let go. He gently patted her head. "Hold on to that," he whispered. "It'll guide you in the dark." They left the shelter and entered the storm. The rain fell heavy, turning the ground into mud. Ryland led the way through narrow alleys, past rusted signs and collapsed towers. The wind tore through broken windows, carrying the sound of engines above. Blue lights flashed through the clouds, sweeping across the ruins. The searchers were close. Saren stumbled, but Ryland caught her arm, helping her up. Her body trembled from the cold, but her grip was strong. They reached an old maintenance shaft that led into the deeper tunnels. Ryland opened the hatch, motioning for them to go first. One by one, they crawled in, disappearing into the dark. When Novi hesitated, scared by the narrow hole, Ryland smiled and whispered, "I'm right behind you." She nodded and climbed down, her tiny hands clutching the sides. As soon as he followed, a flash of light filled the sky. A ship descended above the ruins, spraying beams of white light across the area. Through the metal cracks, Ryland could see armored figures landing. Humans, not aliens. But their armor carried the mark of the colonial authority. The same people who abandoned this world. They were not rescuers. They were hunters. Deep below, in the darkness, Lyra began to cry softly. Ryland pressed a finger to his lips, signaling silence. The echo of boots and scanners filled the tunnels above. He could hear their voices through the metal. Scan for biosigns. Priority targets are small life forms. Class B genetic readings. They were talking about the girls. He felt anger rise inside him like fire. These children had done nothing wrong, yet they were being hunted like animals. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to think. He knew a way to the lower maintenance hub, a maze of tunnels no scanner could fully read. If he could get them there, they might survive. He whispered to Saren, pointing down the dark path. She nodded and guided the younger ones forward. Ryland stayed behind for a moment, pulling a small device from his belt. The flare grenade. He set the timer and tossed it into a side tunnel. A bright light exploded, filling the chamber with heat. The scanners above screamed with false readings. For a moment, chaos erupted among the searchers. Ryland used that moment to move. They crawled for nearly an hour before reaching the end of the tunnel. A broken airlock stood before them, rusted but intact. He forced it open with all his strength, the metal screeching in protest. Behind it lay an underground bay, full of old cargo containers. Safe, at least for now. The girls collapsed on the ground, exhausted. Ryland closed the hatch and sealed it with a metal rod. He sat beside them, soaked and trembling, staring at the faint glow of Novi's stick. It flickered softly, lighting their faces. He saw hope in their eyes again. Despite everything, they still believed in him. He couldn't let that faith die. Above them, thunder rolled again, mixed with the roar of engines. The storm had not passed. It was only beginning. Ryland looked up and whispered quietly, "If they want you, they'll have to go through me first." His voice was calm, his eyes steady. Outside, the sky flashed with blue lightning as the hunters began their search in full force. The real battle for survival had just begun. The underground bay was cold and dark, the air thick with dust and rusted memories. Ryland leaned against a crate, breathing heavily, listening to the distant hum of ships above. He had fought in wars before, but this felt different. He wasn't protecting a base or a planet this time. He was protecting 3 small hearts that trusted him more than the universe ever did. Saren sat quietly near the wall, holding her sisters close. Their faces glowed faintly in the dim light. their blue skin reflecting the flicker of Novi's glow stick. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Only the sound of dripping water and Ryland's slow breathing filled the silence. Then, suddenly, the air trembled. A low vibration passed through the floor like a heartbeat in the earth. Ryland stiffened, gripping his blaster. The girls looked at him in fear. Before he could speak, a loud metallic clang echoed above. The hatch they had sealed was being forced open. Ryland's instincts took over. He motioned for the girls to hide behind the cargo containers. They obeyed instantly, crawling into the narrow space. He crouched behind a steel beam, his blaster ready. A burst of sparks rained down as the hatch was pried open. A team of armored soldiers dropped through, their helmets glowing red with scanners. Thermal readings confirm multiple targets, one of them said through a distorted voice. Ryland's jaw tightened. He fired first, the bolt of light cutting through the dark. The shot hit the lead soldier's shoulder, spinning him back. Chaos exploded. Blaster fire lit up the bay, painting walls with streaks of blue and red light. The air filled with smoke and echoes. Ryland moved fast, using the shadows for cover. His old training returned like muscle memory. He hit one, then another, but there were too many. A bolt grazed his arm, burning through the fabric. He gritted his teeth and kept firing. Then, behind the noise, he heard something else, a soft sound, almost like humming. It wasn't coming from the soldiers, it was coming from the girls. Behind the crates, a faint blue light began to pulse. Saren held her sisters close, whispering something ancient. The air around them shimmered. The soldiers stopped for a second, their scanners flashing red, unable to read the sudden surge. Then the light burst outward like a wave. A pulse of energy swept through the bay, silent but powerful. The soldiers were thrown backward, their armor smoking, their weapons short-circuited. Ryland ducked behind cover, shielding his eyes. When he looked up, the entire bay was glowing with a soft blue radiance. The girls stood together in the center, their eyes glowing like stars. Ryland could feel the warmth of the energy brushing against his skin. It wasn't burning, it was healing. The pain in his wounded arm faded. The light pulsed again, slower this time, then dimmed. When it was over, the soldiers lay unconscious, their armor cracked. Ryland stared at the girls, shocked and breathless. Saren stumbled slightly, her face pale. He rushed to her, catching her before she fell. What was that?" he whispered. She touched his chest with her trembling hand and said one word. Heart. He didn't understand the language, but he understood the meaning. It came from inside them, from something far beyond human science. They weren't just survivors, they were carriers of something powerful, something alive. A living energy born from emotion itself. Lyra and Novi clung to him, their tiny hands shaking. He smiled softly, whispering, "It's okay, you did good." Outside, alarms began to echo again, distant but growing closer. More ships were landing, the storm above turning red with thruster fire. Ryland looked at the unconscious soldiers, then back at the girls. He knew staying here was suicide. They had to move. He grabbed a backpack, loading food, water, and a small power cell. Saren tried to stand, her strength fading. Ryland lifted her up gently, carrying her in his arms. Lyra took Novi's hand, following close behind. They moved through the maintenance corridor at the back of the bay. The path led to the old transport tunnels, an endless maze that could hide them for days. As they disappeared into the shadows, thunder rolled above once more. But this time, Ryland didn't feel fear. He had seen something that changed everything. He had witnessed light born from compassion, power born from innocence. And for the first time in years, he believed again. Not in war, not in soldiers, but in the strange, fragile beauty of life. Behind them, the bay burned, sparks flying into the storm. But deep underground, a human and 3 alien children walked together, their steps slow but steady, the light within them glowing just enough to guide their way forward. The galaxy might still be hunting them, but something greater had already begun. A bond stronger than blood, brighter than war, and powerful enough to change worlds. The tunnels stretched endlessly beneath the ruined colony. Ryland's flashlight flickered as he walked, his boots echoing softly on the wet stone floor. He carried Saren in his arms, her head resting weakly against his shoulder. Her glow had dimmed since the burst of power, her breathing shallow and slow. Lyra and Novi followed close behind, holding each other's hands, their eyes wide with fear. The air smelled of iron and age. They had been walking for hours, searching for a safe place. Every sound felt louder in the silence. Water dripping, stone cracking, his heart beating. Rylan stopped finally, setting Saren down gently beside an old service door. He crouched, catching his breath, and checked her pulse. It was there, faint but steady. He smiled softly, whispering, "You're okay, kid, just rest." The two younger girls knelt beside her, whispering in their alien language. Their hands glowed faintly as they touched her forehead. Rylan watched in amazement as a soft blue light spread between them. It wasn't energy this time. It was warmth, calm, like a shared heartbeat. Saren's eyes fluttered open, and she smiled weakly at her sisters. Rylan couldn't understand their words, but he didn't need to. He felt it, that connection that crossed all barriers of species. He sat back, staring at them with quiet wonder. He had fought across half the galaxy, seen machines that could destroy worlds. But he had never seen anything so human as the way these three children held onto each other. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked around. There was a sign half buried in dust, Bio Vault 07. The old research vaults, long abandoned after the war. If power still ran inside, maybe they could rest there, maybe find something useful. Rylan pried the door open with a crowbar, metal grinding painfully against metal. A stale wave of air escaped, carrying the scent of chemicals and rust. Inside were long corridors filled with broken glass and faded warning signs. They stepped in carefully, Rylan's light cutting through the dark. Old computers lined the walls, their screens cracked but still humming faintly. He moved to one terminal, brushing away dust and pressing a few buttons. The screen flickered to life, displaying old security logs. Most of it was unreadable, but one line caught his eye. Project Genesis, Bioform Preservation Program. Subjects 003, 004, 005. Rylan froze, his eyes scanning the words again and again. 3 subjects, 3 numbers. He turned slowly toward the girls. Saren's eyes met his, as if she already knew. He pointed at the screen, whispering, You were part of this." She looked down, her small hands trembling. Then she reached for the console, pressing her palm against the cold metal. The machine reacted instantly. Lights came alive around the room, one by one, systems activating after years of silence. A holographic display flickered above them, an image of 3 small alien infants floating in pods. Data scrolled beside it. Hybrid energy nodes, emotion reactors, capable of life energy transfer. Rylan's chest tightened. They weren't just alien children. They were living experiments, created to hold a power meant to restore dead planets. But something had gone wrong. The war came before the project could finish. The scientists fled, leaving their creations behind. And now, decades later, those creations were the 3 frightened girls sitting before him. He stared at them, guilt washing over him like a wave. They were never meant to fight or suffer. They were meant to heal, to bring back what the war had destroyed. Saren stepped forward, placing her glowing hand over his heart. Her eyes met his, full of sadness, yet strong. She whispered a word in her language, then another that sounded almost human. Home. Rylan understood. They wanted to go back to their world, or what was left of it. He nodded slowly, his voice firm. Then we'll find it. Lyra and Novi smiled faintly, their trust absolute. He turned back to the console, trying to download the old data. But before the system could finish, a red alarm flashed across the screen. Signal transmission detected, incoming response. The sound of engines returned, louder now, shaking the vault walls. They had been found. Rylan grabbed his pack and turned to the girls. Time to move, he said quickly. Saren nodded, already standing, her glow returning, stronger than before. The light spread through the hallway like a living flame, illuminating their path. Rylan looked at her with awe. He didn't know how far they could run, but he knew this. He would never let them be taken again. As they ran through the corridors, alarms screaming above them, Rylan realized the truth of the galaxy's cruel balance. War destroyed, science corrupted, but life always found a way. And in that moment, deep underground, surrounded by darkness and metal, he saw it clearly. Humanity hadn't saved these alien girls. They had saved what was left of humanity inside him. The tunnels shook as engines roared above. Rylan led the girls through narrow corridors, his boots slipping on wet metal. The vaults behind them hummed faintly, pulsing with residual energy. Every step they took felt like a race against time. The enemy ships above were fast, too fast. If they caught up, the girls would be taken, and their power misused again. Saren held her sisters tightly, her eyes glowing brighter with each step. She whispered something in her language, and Rylan felt the vibration. It wasn't words. It was emotion, pure and unbroken. The power within them stirred, like a river waiting to burst. Rylan realized then that these children were not fragile. They were strong in ways the galaxy had never prepared him to understand. At the tunnel's end, a collapsed stairwell led to the surface. Rylan peeked out, seeing the enemy drones scanning below. The sky was red with the thrusters of landing ships. He took a deep breath, checking his blaster and flare. There was no turning back. He would protect these girls or die trying. "Stay close," he whispered. The girls nodded, Lyra gripping Novi's hand. Saren's glowing eyes scanned the skies, her small form trembling but unbroken. Rylan counted down silently in his head, then sprinted forward. The first flare erupted behind them, blinding the drones temporarily. Blaster fire hissed past, sparks flying as the air grew heavy with heat. Then, something incredible happened. Saren stopped, her palms raised toward the sky. A surge of blue energy radiated outward. The drones faltered, their sensors overloaded. The energy pulsed from her like heartbeat and light combined. Rylan watched in awe as Lyra and Novi joined hands, amplifying it. A dome of soft blue shimmer spread across the ruins. The ships above shook violently, caught in the invisible wave. Rylan shielded the girls instinctively, feeling the warmth of the power against his skin. It wasn't destructive, it was life, a force of creation and hope. The storm and red thrusters reflected against the blue light. For a moment, the galaxy itself seemed to pause. The drones collapsed one by one, systems fried, engines smoking. The enemy soldiers inside scrambled helplessly, their weapons useless. Breathing heavily, Rylan turned to the girls. Saren's glow faded slightly, exhaustion taking her small body. He knelt beside her, holding her hands. "You're safe now," he whispered. The energy dissipated, leaving the ruins calm and silent. The rain washed the metal floors, soft droplets falling on them like blessing. He looked at the horizon, now quiet. He knew they couldn't stay, the world above would eventually find them. But somewhere far away, a place awaited where they could be free. Saren, Lyra, and Novi looked at him with eyes full of trust and wonder. He smiled, a mix of relief and pride. They had survived, not by weapons, not by luck, but by the bond between them, and the courage of one human who refused to abandon hope. Rylan lifted the girls, one by one, carrying them toward a distant escape route, through broken pipes and collapsed corridors. The blue glow lingered faintly, a reminder of the power within them. Outside, the stars began to appear, scattered through the storm clouds. Rylan looked up and whispered to himself, "Maybe humanity isn't lost after all." And in that moment, beneath the galaxy that had tried to destroy them, a soldier and 3 alien girls walked toward a future they would forge together. A future bright with hope, courage, and the unbreakable light of life. The storm faded. The ruins grew quiet. And for the first time in a long time, Rylan knew one simple truth. That kindness, no matter how small, could change the course of stars. And that one human's heart could protect worlds. He glanced at the girls, sleeping peacefully in his arms, and whispered, "We're home." The galaxy, vast and cold, had met its match, not in armies or weapons, but in compassion, courage, and the unyielding bond of humanity and innocence.